So there are events that will happen in life then that will bring up a lot of thoughts and feelings and whatnot like that. And so the mind will burn and spin on. So you might be able to identify those things for yourself of what is our current prison right now. Okay, what I mean by what is the current prison? What is it that the mind seems to be locked into? And so when we have in advance the let us say the guarding of the mind or the right view that that particular topic is now going to be off limits. Now, I've had many different examples of this through life. One of them would be that the old man had been going to the temple, caring for the temple, friends with all the people in the temple, and doing what he needed to do that assisted both the temple, his family, and the village. And then the young new monk comes from a different walk, and he and that old man get into a fight or an argument with each other. And then the old man goes home. But this old man, being an old Dhamma dude, is very, very wise in the sense that what he's going to do is he's not going to let any thoughts about that argument come into his mind, which means he's not going to let any thoughts of that monk come into his mind, because he knows if he thinks about that monk, he'll think about the argument. Therefore, now he's going to say, let's broaden it, because now, if I think about the what, think about the temple, then I'll think about that monk, and then I'll think about the argument. So now the whole what is off limits. Okay? And that the way then we handle it is that what, and everything about it, or that whole topic of conversation, and in some cases, it could be an entire country. Like, don't think about England, anything about England, especially if you come from England and are living in Thailand. Why? Because thoughts of home is only going to be negative thoughts. And so we can say, in order to be here now, the very kind of thoughts, homesickness or whatever, remembrance of an argument, mourning over someone who's died, loss of a job, or any variety of things that the mind tends, because of loss or perhaps gain, will tend to burn on and spin on. And you already know that if you can catch that, you can throw it out. But now you're complaining because you know that you can catch it and throw it out. Because you have to practice catching it and throwing it out.
Yeah.
Okay. But here's the point. Every time you catch those thoughts and throw them out, you can have a sigh of relief. Well, I don't have to think about that. We can say, like, let's put it out of the mind. Except it's going to come back. Yeah, well, here's the thing. If you put it out of the mind, and then later it comes back, is that not better than it came to the mind, you ground on about it, worried about it that whole time, and now when it comes back to mind, well, that's because it's been here all along. Or you can throw it out, and now it's gone for a while, and then it comes up, and you catch it, and you throw it out again. And then it
yes, that's definitely better.
Right, that's definitely better, right. But when you have to throw it out again, you say, well, why do I have to take that effort? And the right answer is because that's dukkha, and you can be dukkha nirodha by throwing it right out. So having that that relief of, oh, I'm glad I don't have to think about her anymore. Or, God, I'm glad I don't have to think about Trump anymore.
Oh boy.
So whatever it is that's burning the mind, we can be on guard for that, so that those thoughts, as soon as they come up, they're not going to come up and ruminate around because we are not on guard. Now that we know what to guard for, we're going to be on guard and not allow those kind of unwholesome thoughts come in.
And I have a question. So it seems like, for me, I think I've identified that mostly it's thoughts of the future that I'm preoccupied with. Deadlines, things I need to get done, all this sort of stuff. I treat that the same way as just thoughts about the past, right? There's not really any difference between the two. It's just my mind grasping on something that's not now.
Okay, let's put it this way. The past is gone and dead, period. So there's nothing to be done with that. And so throwing the old past out is good. For the future, there are some things that we need to do mentally. An example of that would be a future thing like it's time, and I'll use the example of that in Thailand there's a certain kind of bank account that the U.S. government will put money in, but you have to go to the bank to get that money for Social Security. The U.S. does not want people in Thailand to die, and then they keep sending money to Thailand for somebody else to get. In the U.S., they have a whole procedure of death certificates, and everybody gets to know and all of that kind of stuff. But a Westerner can die in Thailand and nobody will ever know. Or the people who do know would not ever tell the embassy or the government or anything, because that's just not how things go here. So that bank account is a particular deal between the bank in Thailand and the Social Security that I've got to go to the bank to get that money out, okay?
Okay.
So all I have to do to get that money out of the bank is to get the bank book and take it to the bank and my passport, only 2 documents. I know where they are, so I don't have to think about it or dwell upon it. I've got everything that I needed. Okay, another idea would be the visa. This one's a big one because with the retirement visa, it takes about a whole stack of papers, and it winds up being about 20 pages of documentation, because you've got to get a health certificate, you've got to get bank note, you've got to go to the landlord and get several documents from the landlord, and a police report, and a health report, and all of that kind of stuff. It's really complicated, but once you get into doing it, it's just, now we know. Okay, so learning what to do is almost always frustrating for people, but once we know what we've got to do. Now, going to the bank, I don't have to go to the bank in my mind. I don't have to remind myself, oh, someday I've got to go to the bank. It's not important. So I don't have to think about going to the bank. I don't have to keep bringing it back up in my mind. If I decide that I'm going to go to the bank on next Tuesday, then I don't have to give the bank a thought until it's time to go to the bank next Tuesday. So in that regard, what we're saying is, yes, there's a little bit of planning that we cannot get away from. But once the planning is done, there's nothing left to be done. And yet we do continue to repeat the same plans over and over and over and over again before they're actually done.
Yeah, a million times.
Well, that's a little grandiose.
Yes, it is. But it feels like it sometimes. But I know I have
it's
control.
Something like triple digits anyway.
Yeah.
Far too much. However, now that you know that you can say, okay, you can almost make yourself a promise. When it is time to do that, I will do it. And then you can drop it completely. Not just for good, because that's not possible. But rather, you can drop it every time it comes back up.
Right. I drop it now.
And then drop it when it comes back up, right now. That's the practice of over and over again, because some things, some future plans, some documentation, some things are going to be required in life. And so we're not going to go hide in the back of the Wat to not do that kind of work. No, we do it, but we do it well and with ease because it's not a worry. It's not a problem. It's just a task to be done. And actually, not only does the task have to be done, but let us say some preparation. But now let us say, okay, the preparation should also be timely. Some things need to be planned well in advance, but many things just a little bit of advance. An example of that, going back to the visa, is that many of the documents, it would be good to get them at one's leisure, but oh no, the government requires that some of these documents be done within the past 6 days. Well, if that's the case, then why do anything with the mind or even think about it until 6 days before the visa time? And yet, the visa due in January, the mind starts to burn in October. Oh, I've got to do that visa. Oh, I've got to get all of that paperwork together. In America, it's the same thing with the tax returns. A big, complicated deal for some people, and they mull and they worry and they strain and they suffer and they burn and they burn and they sit and they cogitate and they plan, but they're not doing the tax returns. The time to think about doing tax returns is when you're actually doing tax returns. So this is the way that we look at the stuff for the future. Yes, there's some planning that needs to be done, but let's not make the same plans over and over and over again. To catch
Makes sense.
Go ahead.
I just said it. That makes sense to me. Yeah.
Well, that's the practice of the Buddha. The Buddha actually has an analogy of when he was a young man living in the palace. He was well skilled in the princely arts that you would expect him to be, including horse and elephant training. And so he used horse and elephant training in his suttas as examples. That when they catch the elephant, they will tie him up. But in those days, they didn't have chains that were stronger than the elephant. All they had was vines and ropes and stuff like that. And so they would always tie the elephant up by his left hind leg. And the reason they would do that is because that's generally the weakest of the legs. And yet the animal will still stand with maybe his trunk and the other 3 legs and stand with that and take that other leg and swing it back and forth, ruminate over and over and over again until he finally broke free. And then he would take off and go. But the trainers, the men, they knew exactly where the elephant was going to go. Where did he go? He went home. He went back to his herd or back to his favorite pond. They knew where he was going to go, and so they would go back and catch him there. And generally, an animal had to be caught 3 or 4 times until the animal stopped trying to get away. Because he recognized there's no reason to try to get away, because I'll just come back and get chained up again, and now I got to go all the work to get free, and then I wander away, but I keep going back to the same place and get caught again and brought back. If you think of that analogy, the way that the mind works, eventually the thoughts that keep coming up, if we keep throwing those out, then they'll kind of get tired of coming back up, because they'll know they'll get caught again. But it takes a while. You can't throw a thought out and then it's gone. No, it's going to keep coming back, and you throw it out and keep coming back, and you throw it out and keep coming back. And then we forget to throw it out and let it ruminate a while, and then finally we catch it, and then we throw it out. So this is the way of the elephant training that we're going to actually use with the mind. And we can also talk about it in the sense of tethering, like they tethered the animal, the elephant, or the horse. They'll use a bridle, and they tether the animal to a post. So that's exactly what we're doing here also, is that we're tethering the mind to the breath. That's the post that we tie it to. And when the mind wanders away, or when the horse escapes, or the animal escapes, we bring it back and we tie it up again.
It seemed to me like in the periods where I have been more mindful that that sati is just like the base, right? That's like the foundation of, and that's probably like the tethering to the breath. And then it also seemed like as I was keeping my sati, and like through sitting practice, I was kind of like expanding what I was holding within my remembrance in the present, meaning like not just the breath, but also like expanding my field of awareness to like the body. Does that make sense? I'm probably using the wrong terminology.
Give me a second chance. Tell me again what you said.
So it kind of felt like I was kind of like building up momentum with the sati, where at the beginning it was just remembering to remember, and then it was remembering to remember the breath, and then I was able to slowly kind of like build up the presence of mind of what actually was in the field of memory, to not just like to be with the breath, but also to be with the body. And it felt like more momentum of being in the present by doing that.
Yes. Yes. That's what brings you back to the present, is remembering. You come back and see what's happening right now. And seeing what's happening, that's the investigation. We look to see, oh, there that thought is again. Oh, there that plan is again. Okay, and so we do that investigation to see what the mind is doing. And then we make a change if we think that that's a good idea. We can actually wake up and recognize, wow, this does feel good already. I'm already in a really good space. I like it. Because we need to cultivate that. If you cultivate being in a good space, then it will arise naturally more frequently. That it does appear that children, when they're really young, they spend a lot of time in joy. They play with their toys. You can see how little kids play together. They have play dates. And one thing you want to make sure, and that is that you don't want any adults around, because the adults are the ones who are going to screw up the play. They want something. The kids are just having fun. And so this is a way that we start growing up. And we do, as children, there are wants and desires and jealousies and whatnot. But by and large, most of the time is spent in joy. But by the time we're school age, that's when it all gets turned around. Now it's time to go to work. Now you have to sit down and do what you're told. Now you have to clean up your room. Why do I have to clean up my room, Daddy? Because I told you to clean it up. Okay, so this is all of that stuff that gets started. And now each individual one has to give up their childhood play and start to take on the mantle of the unhappy adult. And so after we're adults, we've talked ourselves into being unhappy with all the work and all the plans and all the things that have to be done. But now when you come to Anapanasati, it's time to turn all of that around. You have for 20 years or more, or something like that, maybe 15 or so, been talking yourself into feeling bad. So now it's time to talk yourself into feeling good again.
Yeah, I think I didn't realize how much of this journey was actually an attitude shift instead of just something to do. But it's been kind of eye-opening at how negative and self-feeding my attitude can be.
Mm-hmm.
And unnecessarily so. It's not something that it seems like sometimes I need to concern myself with this when really I don't, and it just like kind of feeds this negative outlook.
Mm-hmm. Yes. In fact, you could go so far now as to say that the number one job that we need to do is to figure out that we don't have any jobs to do. That we do, in fact, we have been trained through our society and through the adults that we were around, trained that number one, some things are important, and two, that what makes them important is you have to feel bad about
Hmm.
them. But if we recognize that, wait a minute, nothing's really all of that important. Things don't have that kind of meaning. That really, if there's any value in life, it's to enjoy this present moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of the gold and all of the Goldman Sachs statements and any of that kind of stuff does not really bring joy. So we have to recognize, oh no, the outside world is not going to bring joy. That the only place that we're really going to find it is the only way that we could have ever gotten it in the first place, and that is by it comes from within our own mind. Maybe I didn't tell you this, but there's an old story that I like. The guy's name is Ed McMahon. Ed McMahon was on the Johnny Carson show many years ago, and he was the one that would say, "Here's Johnny." Well, after the Late Show closed and Johnny Carson wasn't on anymore, Ed McMahon took a job with Publishers Clearinghouse, which was a conglomerate that was buying up magazines, because this was in the day when magazines were beginning to fall apart. In the old days, every household took 4 or 5 magazines. Now, I don't know of anybody who takes any magazines anymore. Well, during that time, then, they were using promotions, and one of the promotions they would have was like their own sweepstakes. So you can use this like the same thing as the lottery. And so they had the television cameras, and they would show the commercial on TV of him coming up and knocking on some old lady's door and handing her a big check for $10 million. And it was one of those big fancy checks only you could see on television. I don't think a bank would want that check. They want the little ones that they can work with. So the whole point is that when people hear this story, they almost always smile at the thought of $10 million. Just thinking a thought will bring joy. The actual $10 million, not so much. Why? Because with that $10 million comes auditors, tax accountants, new family members, people who are trying to sell you something, greed, old resentments, and revenge will come up. And what they have found over a long period of time, that they need to take these lotteries and dole it out over many years, because if you give the individual all of his lotteries all at one time, he'll make massive radical changes to his life. And then 3 years later, he winds up broke, debt, lost his job or quit his job, lost his family. It's absolute destruction. because of that kind of a windfall. All right, so it's not really a good idea. But the thought of getting it, the thought of getting a big windfall, that brings joy. So it's the thought always that brings joy. And generally, our thoughts, we can talk ourselves into feeling good, just like we have been for years talking ourselves into feeling bad. Your thoughts determine everything. There is a sutta number 19 in the Majjhima Nikaya that talks about two kinds of thoughts. And we can generally break thoughts into two groups that are wholesome and groups that are unwholesome. Any thought that brings you to the point where you are happy and joyful and being in the moment, that would be a wholesome thought. Any thought that will take you out of being happy and joyful and in the moment would be an unwholesome thought. Even if it's something really important that you've got to do. In fact, if it's really important you've got to do it, that's guaranteed going to take you out of the state of being in joy. And at the bottom of all of this is an unsettled feeling that can be traced to the fact that we don't feel secure. If I don't go do that, then something bad's going to happen. Therefore, now I feel insecure because I have not yet done something in the future that needs to be done.
Yeah.
It's almost like that fear that we have now is the motivator that will get us to do the work. Well, if that's the only motivator that got us to do it, then maybe if we can get ourselves into the position to where we feel safe and secure, we don't have to do it. This is what the Buddha means by karma that leads to the end of karma. Now, when I use the word karma here, I'm actually using it in the flat old regular definition translation of action or work in our case, or a job to be done. So any work that we do is generally because of the old patterns, but there is a certain amount of work that we can do, or a certain amount of actions that we can take that will bring about the end of action. And so this is one of them, in fact. Becoming secure means that you don't have to go shopping for weapons. That's something that's really interesting about gun rights in the United States. That what they need to do is to close every gun store and open up a psychotherapy shop on that site, but don't change any of the signs. Let the gun nut still think it's a gun store. And then he go in and get some therapy. Because that's what it's all about. All the weapons has to do with they're feeling insecure. Most of the work that we do is because we feel insecure. So if we can get ourselves into a state of security, then we don't have to do so much. Now, in this regard, with Anapanasati, we can see it there, that the mind is burning, it's spinning, it's worried, it's doing something, it's planning for the future. That's a kind of a work. That's a kind of action. But waking up and saying, I don't have to have that thought, and then throwing that thought out is also an action. But it's the action that leads to the end of the old action. There's many cases where you can see that, okay? Let us say that the cops want to stop traffic. So they do a little thing. They put up a roadblock. That's all they have to do is just put up a roadblock. And look how much traffic they can stop by putting up a roadblock. Well, we're going to start putting up roadblocks also. So that if we can catch that thing now, then that meant we didn't have to spend 15 or 20 minutes in heavy traffic of the mind worrying about something because we're able to throw it out. That in fact it might come up again 5 minutes from now. Okay, we throw it out again. So this is the way that we do it. We take the action that leads to the end of action, and it almost always has to do with getting ourselves into a good state so that we feel good, and then those old thoughts are much easier to manage, much easier to control. But if you do have the attitude, oh no, here they come again, oh, these thoughts are so heavy, well, that's a loser's attitude. The right attitude is, I threw you out before, I'm going to throw you out again. You're out of here. You are not going to make my house miserable. So that's
This
the
is
way.
good. Yeah. You've told me this before, but now this time that you're saying it, I've had actually more experience, and I've seen that I can do that. So it's yeah, that's good. That's great.
That's
I
it.
can do it. I got it.
Yeah, I got it right. That's what I want to hear. All right. Well, you go practice that, Julien, a little bit, and call me back, and we'll talk about how successful you are.
All right. Let's do that.
Okay. Well, we'll see you later.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.